Welcome back to the Ben Mulroney Show. It's Monday. It's near the end of the show, and we like to supercharge it with two of our favorite guests, Max Fawcett and Dimitri Soudas. They are always here on Mondays for This Week in Politics, the Monday edition. To the both of you, I hope you had great weekends, great respective weekends, and I hope Monday is shaping up to be great as well. Let's jump right in. And Dimitri, I want to start with you. Explain to me this Alberta judge blocking a referendum on separation in Alberta, claiming that it doesn't respect First Nations treaty rights. And then do Quebec for me.
and then the rest of the country, in case we become the 51st state, which we won't. So good luck to a judge on trying to block a referendum on anything, quite frankly. A referendum is a public consultation. In this case, it would be a referendum on Alberta's separation. There is a technical difference between a referendum to separate Alberta from Canada versus a referendum to separate Quebec from Canada, because Alberta became a province by federal statute in the early 1900s, and there wasn't a negotiated agreement or a plebiscite, unlike Quebec, which joined Confederation in 1867 through negotiated terms. So because Alberta was created by federal law, the Canadian Parliament actually has the constitutional authority to modify or abolish it under Section 45. Now, there's a difference at this point between what's going on in Alberta and in Quebec. Why do I say that? Well, you have a premier that says she's a federalist. She wants to keep Alberta within Canada. At the same time, the sovereignist movement, or the separatist movement, as Anglophones like to call it, in the last by-election, which took place in Alberta, and Pierre Poilievre got elected, they got less than, I think, 1 or 2% of the vote. On the other hand, in Quebec, you currently have the Parti Québécois, party that was founded in the 1970s, that is leading in the polls and promising a referendum in the first mandate. The big difference is that the first two referenda, 1980 and 1995, were held prior to the Clarity Act. If the PQ wins, and if there is a referendum in Quebec in 2000, between 2026 and 2030, if the PQ wins, it would have to be under the rules of the Clarity Act as well.
Wow, geez, I mean, you just laid it out chapter and verse for us. Well, let's go to somebody who is in the heart of it as well. Max, you're in Alberta. What do you make of this ruling? And what do you look, whether or not you agree, Max, with the Alberta separatist movement, whether or not you agree with any of that, what does it say that yet again there's another judge bringing? It seems like the litmus test for almost everything these days is First Nations rights. And I'm finding it odd because I don't remember it being this way in the past. Now, I'm not making a value judgment on whether it's right or wrong. I'm simply saying I'm hearing more about it from the bench than I ever have before.
I think we need to take the judge's ruling at face value. He was very clear that this does not actually block a referendum on separatism. He was very clear about that. I see folks in the fever swamps of the internet trying to claim that, that the judge is restricting the liberties of Albertans. Nothing could be further from the truth. And his decision actually calls on a decision that was made in 1997 with respect to Quebec. So the idea that there's a double standard here is just demonstrably untrue. All you need to do is read the judge's ruling to see that he's building on a decision that stemmed from the 1995 referendum in Quebec. Both governments in Quebec and the government in Alberta has a constitutional responsibility to respect Indigenous title and Indigenous treaties. And as Dimitri pointed out, the treaties that were signed in Alberta, there's a number of numbered treaties, were signed between the Crown and Indigenous nations. They were not signed by Alberta. Yeah. So Alberta cannot on its own violate those treaties. I know this upsets some people, but Indigenous people have rights too in this country. Yeah. And they get to exercise them through our courts. Rest assured, the separatists in Alberta will get their referendum. The Alberta government of Danielle Smith is doing everything in her power to ensure that they get to have their referendum. The judge's ruling was in part a response to legislation tabled by the government of Alberta that prevented courts from ruling against referendum questions posed by members of the public. So she is bending every rule she can, most of them made by herself, to ensure that these separatists get their question on the ballot.
So do you think, Max, that this is I guess what it is with each successive Quebec referendum, and now Alberta is having their kick at the can. It's this ever-evolving attempt to establish rules of the game in real time. Like, in other words, when you set out to build a country, you don't necessarily set out the rules to break up that country. And so as new players come in to take their kick at breaking it apart, we got to create new rules.
Look, we didn't have the Clarity Act in 1995, and thank goodness we passed that afterwards. That we now have a mandate or a ruling that says you have to have a clear majority on a clear question, not 50+1 on a very muddled question. So that was progress.
Yeah.
I suspect we will perhaps see more progress as we move forward here. But the antipathy that some folks have towards the courts is, I think, wildly misplaced. It's a tell, and I would just encourage them to, imagine how they would feel about the courts pushing back against governments if it was a government they didn't like.
Yeah.
They seem very happy to criticize the courts when they're ruling against conservative governments. When they're ruling against non-conservative ones, suddenly their opinions change, and you can see what's happening in the United States right now.
All right. Well, we got a little more time. I'll editorialize for one sec. If you can tell me what a clear question and a clear answer to that question are. Like I
got it.
Yeah. Oh, you got it? Tell me, because I'm telling you, there are a lot of people out there who believe that 50%+1 is the definition of a clear answer. I know that you're shaking your head, Max, but there are people out there that say 1% above 50, 1% above 50 is the definition of clear.
Well, as you know, I'm born and raised in Quebec. So I am 50%+1, but to a very clear question. What's that very clear question? I was campaigning in 1995. I was 16, 15 years old, and it was literally a paragraph and a half. The question is so simple. Do you want to separate Alberta from Canada? Do you want to separate Quebec from Canada?
Yeah.
And even if Alberta held a referendum, a yes result, I'm on the 50%+1 side, that would only force negotiations with Ottawa. It does not force automatic independence. And don't forget, the 1980 referendum in Quebec by René Lévesque, the 1995 referendum by the PQ, especially the 1981. Its main objective was to get a mandate from the people of Quebec in that case in order to negotiate a better deal within Confederation. And if there was no passage to a better deal, then that would mean more discussions and possibly another referendum for independence. I will remind you that in the early 1990s, negotiated by the government of Brian Mulroney and at the time the Liberal government in Quebec, Quebec got more immigration powers, for example, to control its immigration. Ottawa kept some of those powers. But again, these are the discussions. In the case of Alberta, and Max probably knows better than me, the question is natural resources.
Yep. Well, I think, listen, I'm of the opinion that 50%+1 shouldn't cut it because as we say in French, les enjeux, they are different. Like if you get a yes versus a no at 50%+1, a no is a no for today and a yes is a yes forever. And therefore, I think that the benchmark that you have to clear should be higher than 50%+1. I think it's got to take into account some people who are voting emotionally. And if you want to know that, if you tested that question again 6 months later, you'd still get the same result. And I think if you're talking about the life of a country and ending it in a meaningful way, then 50%+1, because that could change the day before, the day after, is too low. But that's one humble radio show's host's opinion. I don't know. Max, what do you think? We only have about half.
A humble radio show host who lived through Meech Lake, Charlottetown, and so on. Max, what do you think?
Yeah. I think it should be a supermajority, something that consequential. You cannot unbreak up a country. It is extremely difficult. We see this right now in the UK with Brexit. Just the damage that's been done to that country's economy and the challenge they're having in sort of putting the toothpaste back in the tube. It's not like an election. It's not like you can just replace the people at the next election. This is life or death, and should be a supermajority. And if you can get that amount of people to want to break a country up, then, full steam ahead, I suppose.
Thanks so much for watching the show. Now, if you enjoyed what you saw, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode of The Ben Mulroney Show.